Oh, well, hello. Thank you for coming. I was just doing a bit of light reading. This book is called The Mist, written by Stephen King and published about 1980. It provided the inspiration for my latest build, which I feel is the best static prop I've ever created. There are many different types of creatures in the book, but there's one in particular that stood out. It's a spider-like creature that has a wasp-like tail, it has spiny-like hairs, and has elongated human-like teeth. It's a really menacing sight. As further inspiration, I found a few artist illustrations of the creature, as well as watched the film The Mist that was made from the book. This provided the best point of reference. I also researched arachnids here on Earth so as not to offend too many of them in the process. I started working on the creature during the 2020 build season. The goal was for it to make its first appearance during Halloween weekend. There was a lot of fanfare surrounding the unveil. The local newspaper even wrote a story about it, which told everyone to be excited for the creature's imminent arrival during the final weekend. Just as I was about to put the finishing touches on it, New Orleans went under a hurricane warning. Hurricane Zeta hit the city directly and made landfall on October 28th. So we had to take down the entire display and end the season a few days early. The promised monster never made it. The silver lining was that I was able to do more work on it in 2021 and add a lot more detail, especially with the painting. But then, at the end of August, when I was nearly finished again, the unthinkable happened. Another hurricane. This one a lot worse. Hurricane Ida made landfall on August 29, 2021 as a strong Category 4 and caused extensive damage and made our house uninhabitable for a time. We announced that we needed to take a hiatus that year. But then somehow, with enough persistence and resolve, we were able to pull it all together and not only run the full show, called Ghost Manor, but also let the monster make its appearance in all its glory after all this time. If there's any comedy in this tragedy, it might be that this is a fine example of life imitating art. You see, in the book, the creatures didn't appear until just after a devastating storm ravaged the town. So without further ado, it's my privilege to share how I created my version of this creature. I'm distilling months of work into 10 minutes, so I can't cover all the details. But I do give an overview of the various techniques involved, and there are a lot. There's sculpting in 6 different media: molding, casting, CAD 3D printing, handmade eyes and teeth, airbrushing, and a whole lot more. I hope you enjoy. I used flexible aluminum wire to create a rough shape for the body and tail. After I was satisfied with the shape of the armature, I then took sheets of thin cardboard, coated both sides with contact cement, then cut them into strips. I then used these strips to form the shape of the body, similar to a papier-mâché technique. Using cardboard and contact cement is both faster and creates a more durable structure. For the body surface, I wanted to have a skin texture with large bumps. I used various sized candy molds to cast each bump out of papier-mâché clay. These molds, however, produce perfect half domes, and no monster has perfect bumps. So before they would fully harden, I demolded them and shaped each one individually by hand into something more monster-like. There were over 1,000 bumps in all, so it took a while. To attach the bumps and create the rest of the skin texture, I rolled out large flat sheets of papier-mâché clay, much like you would cookie dough. The tail section was more challenging because it has a complicated plate-like structure. So I wrapped the tail in paper, drew the structure, and cut it out into individual shapes to use as templates for the clay. Finally, as I decided to use dozens of 2-foot-long ostrich quills as spiny hairs coming out of the body, I 3D printed some cylindrical sockets that the quills could be plugged into and later removed for storage. For the legs, I wanted to actually sculpt them, really refine the shape, and even have claw-like appendages on some of them. Ideally, they'd be lightweight, strong, posable, and detachable in sections for easier storage. The solution I came up with was to make a skeletal structure out of PVC and then encapsulate that inside of styrofoam that I could then carve. For the PVC skeleton, I used a combination of 1-inch and 1/2-inch PVC bent with a heat gun where necessary. Small PVC joints aren't available, so I had to design them in CAD and 3D print them. After completing the PVC parts, I assembled the full skeleton to do test poses and make sure everything lined up as expected. So far, so good. The PVC is to be sandwiched between 2-inch thick sheets of styrofoam, so ultimately you'd end up with a 4-inch thick block of foam with the PVC in the middle, to both give it strength and provide attachment points on the ends. It's like PVC bones inside of the styrofoam meat. Using a small handheld router, I routed out channels in each styrofoam half to accommodate the PVC. Then I put the PVC inside and glued both halves together. After repeating the process for dozens of leg sections, it was time for the fun part, carving the foam. To rough out the general leg shapes, I used a hot wire routing table and various hot wire hand tools. Then, I used a rasp to fine-tune the shape as well as create surface texture. This was by far the messiest part of the entire build, but it was exciting to see everything literally start taking shape. For the head sculpt, I wanted to make something both lightweight and hollow, in case I ever wanted to turn the static prop into an animatronic at some point. I decided to go with a combination of EVA foam sheet and foam clay. I first created a head form using a wooden stand, aluminum foil, and packing tape. I then wrapped the head form in clear film, then covered the film in white duct tape. I drew a rough sketch of the facial features onto the form to make sure the proportions were right. I then cut the outer layer off the head form and pressed the cut pieces into flat patterns. I then traced the patterns onto some cardboard and assembled it just to make sure it was going to work correctly. After some adjustments, I then traced the pattern onto the EVA foam. I then glued the EVA foam pieces together using contact cement, similar to how you might make a cosplay helmet. The result is a lightweight EVA foam underskull that I could then sculpt on top of using foam clay. In addition to sculpting the facial features, I also used the foam clay to make bumps using the candy molds that I had used previously for the body. Next, I sculpted rough shapes for the fang-like pedipalps out of styrofoam. I then covered the styrofoam with foam clay to produce the final shape and smooth the texture. To make the mouth, I designed and printed a structure that provides an attachment point for the gums. It also lets the jaw articulate for posing and would provide an easy upgrade path from a static to a motion prop in the future. Even as a static prop, doing it this way ensures that the jaw components are perfectly aligned. I wanted to use teeth that were like human teeth but greatly elongated. I couldn't find any like that, so I had to carve them from scratch. Using clay sculpting tools, I carved each individual tooth out of sculpting foam. I had a human skull in front of me for reference. I then coated the teeth in clear epoxy for durability and shine. Then attached the teeth to the 3D printed jaws using epoxy sculpt that I had pre-tinted pink to simulate gums. To make the 6 eyes, I used 3 different size glass cabochon half domes that I then molded in silicone. I also 3D printed some structures to make pupil light pipes and made silicone molds of them too. I then vacuum degassed clear epoxy using a vacuum chamber. Then I poured the pupil molds as well as partially filled up the eye molds, about 20% or so, to form the clear cornea portion of the eyes. I then tinted the front of the pupils yellow by using amber lens repair tape that you find in the auto parts store. I then glued the pupils to the corneas and using heavy magnification, hand painted the irises using very fine brushes. When that dried, I backfilled the rest of the eye molds with epoxy that I had tinted red to form the scleras. For the rear portion of the eyes, I modeled in 3D printed hollow half domes and I painted the inside retina portions white. I then attached yellow LEDs pointed towards the retinas that would then reflect and shine through the pupil light pipes. In this way, I can get an eye shine that looks very realistic. Only the pupil lights up, not the entire eye, and changing the viewing angle changes the appearance, a lot like it does in nature. Next is what I feel is the most enjoyable part of the build, the painting. But first, everything needed to be hard-coated with several coats of a 2-part epoxy designed for outdoor sculptures. It creates a hard plastic shell that's waterproof and nearly as durable as fiberglass. After the hard coat fully cured, I then used an acrylic urethane primer coat to prepare the surfaces for painting. I then airbrushed a pale base color before adding the details, which would involve using lots of layers and colors, as many as 8 for some parts. I decided that this monster has a full vascular system, so I airbrushed veins throughout the body and the legs. I accented the veining with other colors for shadows and highlights to add depth. I then followed with modeling with various shades of browns, oranges, pinks, and purples. I was careful to airbrush around the bumps so they'd remain a whitish color, as if protruding through the skin. At this point, the paint looks bright and a bit neon, but not to worry. This is going to be followed up with the top coat that will make these colors recede into the background, making them appear to be underneath the skin, adding depth and translucency. I also added blemishes all over the leg sections, layering yellowish-brownish tones. This monster certainly doesn't take very good care of its skin, and it also has been in a few battles, picking up some bumps and bruises along the way. To complete the top skin coat layer on the body and tail, I used a deep purple color, thin to provide some transparency. The bright colors painted before still shine through, but it's subtle. It creates variations throughout, resulting in rich shading and overall detail that would have been impossible to achieve without building up the layers. On the tail section, I darkened the shadow areas on the edges of the plates to make sure the pattern stood out more. I painted the head using a similar technique, but I used lighter tones and more delicate shading, including bluish tones around the eyes where the skin is thinner and more translucent. I also used different shades to accentuate the wrinkles and various facial features. While airbrushing this, I actually used close-up photos of humans for reference. Next, I added shading on the pedipalps to make them more realistic. And I also added brownish shading to the teeth and gum line to add a bit of grime. One thing is clear, this monster does not have the best hygiene. Finally, because this is an outdoor prop, I sprayed multiple coats of clear urethane to seal in the acrylic paint and provide both water resistance and UV protection, which are particularly important with colors like purple that tend to be more light fast. I chose to use gloss in order to convey a bit of residual sliminess after the creature oozed through another dimension. To make this arachnid-inspired creature feel at home, I set the scene by purchasing dozens of spider webs, along with hundreds of spiders of various sizes and shapes. The largest webs spanned almost 30 feet. I layered multiple webs to make it look more three-dimensional and add depth and realism. I used additional webs on the upper areas of the house, in keeping with the theme of spiders cocooning the house and making it dangerous to go outside, a relatable feeling in 2020 and 2021. The larger webs are made of rope that fluoresces under a black light, so I lit them using special 365 nanometer LED floodlights that work great for this purpose. I discovered the ostrich quill spines on the monster also fluoresce, so that was an added bonus. To light the creature, I used warm white LED floods for uplighting. I greatly prefer to use white here, as it is best to display all of the airbrush color variations, which stand on their own. For strobing effects, I used a pair of very bright cool white ProLight 400s, most commonly used with lighting machines. I controlled them using a standard DMX dimmer pack connected to my master show control system. Finally, since this creature came out of the mist, I used an ultrasonic fog machine to blanket the ground and add an eerie kinetic element. Combining everything, it creates a feeling that this creature just entered through a portal from another dimension, Lovecraftian reality in which humans are no longer at the top of the food chain. And that's a wrap. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you've learned something or have been able to inspire you in some way. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me and I'll try to do my best to answer them. In the meantime, happy haunting, good luck with your bills, and I'll see you soon.